writes, look very much like my Peter Rabbit marzipan-embellished Easter cake. And that's Marketplace from American Public Media. Today, the Dow dipped 31 points, 0.2%. The Nasdaq bumped up 20 points, 0.5%. And the S&P 500 rose less than a point. Robbie Carmen, Chris Clark, Stephen Colon, Jeff Peters, Daniel Ramirez, and Charlton Thorpe engineer the program for us. I'm David Gura. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
With the phone to my ear, I can't do it. It's illegal.
In more than 3 weeks of fighting, Israeli strikes today hit a crowded shopping area in Gaza City where Palestinian officials say at least 17 people were killed, more than 200 wounded. Hours earlier, tank shells tore through the wall of a UN school that was crowded with refugees. UN Undersecretary General Jan Eliasson says the shelling of the school is an outrage.
We have received with shock and dismay the news of the bombing this morning of a UN-designated shelter in a school, killing at least 16 civilians, including several children, and injuring more than 100.
Speaking to Costa Rica, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said there's nothing more shameful than attacking sleeping children. The Israeli military says 3 of its soldiers were killed when a booby-trapped house collapsed after they identified an entrance to a tunnel that raised the Israeli death toll to 56. The Peace Corps is pulling volunteers from several West African countries to protect them from an outbreak of deadly Ebola virus. Here's Michelle Kellerman has more.
The Peace Corps says it's removing its volunteers from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, and will work closely with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to decide when they might return. In Guinea, 102 Americans are working on education, agriculture, and health. There are 108 education volunteers in Liberia and 130 in Sierra Leone. The CDC says there's no significant risk to the United States from the current Ebola outbreak. The State Department says it's keeping U.S. citizens in the affected areas up to date. The White House says President Obama is receiving regular updates too, but there are no plans to change or cancel an upcoming summit of African leaders. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
On Wall Street, the Dow was down 31, S&P gained a fraction, Nasdaq added 20 points. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from the Walton Family Foundation, whose K-12 initiative works to empower families with quality school choices. WaltonK12.org. This is WAMU 88.5 and 88.3 in Ocean City, Maryland. Good evening, I'm Rebecca Shear in for Pat Brogan. It's 6:32 with the latest on traffic out there. Here's Mike Ramirez. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Rebecca. Over the Beltway, very heavy. Tyson's Pass River Road out over the Beltway, slow. Van Dorn to the Wilson Bridge. Big problem in Virginia, northbound at 395.
degree. It's 79 degrees in Northwest Washington. In the news, the prosecution's key witness in the corruption trial of former Governor Bob McDonnell and his wife Maureen has testified that he gave the couple money because it was a business relationship, not because they were friends. Prosecutors say Johnny Williams, the businessman at the center of the scandal, gave McDonnell and his wife more than $165,000 in secret gifts in exchange for promoting his company. Attorneys for the McDonnells have questioned Williams' character and say he changed his story to receive immunity from prosecutors. D.C.'s mayor and chief financial officer is facing a lawsuit by a charter advocacy group. As Kaditha Cardoza tells us, the group alleges that the government funds the city's two public school systems unequally.
There's a law in D.C. that requires the government to fund the city's traditional and charter schools at the same level. But for years, charter school advocates have complained the D.C. government violates that obligation. Ramona Edelin is the director of the D.C. Association of Chartered Public Schools.
After more than a decade of trying every other means of contra dances, have provided Beethoven with a lot of inspiration.
Growth rate for the second quarter is confirmation that the U.S. economy is back on track. And despite the Fed's generally stand-pat statement today, Putnam believes there's consensus forming at the Fed that it's time to normalize policy.
I'm just suggesting that there's a core group in the Fed that I think is getting larger that just wants to exit anything that you might think of as an emergency policy. Because we're 5 years into this expansion, you really don't need to be in an emergency mode.
The Fed statement indicated it is continuing to do that by winding down its stimulative bond buying program. It said it will reduce its bond purchases to $25 billion a month in August, down from $35 billion in July. But Putnam thinks a consensus is forming among Fed officials that it should also end its emergency zero interest rate policy sooner than previously planned. Right now, the markets and most analysts expect the first rate hike to come sometime around the middle of next year.
I'm more in the camp they start to push rates higher early next year.
And, says Putnam, the recent stronger job growth provides the Fed with the justification for raising rates sooner.
But at the end of the day, if we're creating 200,000 plus jobs a month, the economy is getting healthier every month.
But while Fed officials acknowledge the improving labor market in their statement, they also introduced this new language. Quote, a range of labor market indicators suggests there remains significant underutilization of labor resources. There's little doubt Fed Chair Janet Yellen was instrumental in inserting that cautionary line into the statement. Yellen has been clear, says John Canale of LPL Financial, that she is looking beyond overall job growth and the unemployment rate to measure the health of the labor
She looks at things like the amount of full-time workers to part-time workers. Still way more part-time workers than average for this time in the business cycle. She looks at things like the median duration of unemployment. Still way higher than it was before the downturn.
These indicators lead Canali to believe the Federal Open Market Committee won't move faster to raise short-term rates.
The majority of the members of the FOMC are probably in the same mode as Janet Yellen's in, which is probably lower for longer.
And the statement from policymakers today said again, they will likely keep their target interest rate at its current level, essentially zero, for a considerable time. John Estee, NPR News, Washington. Wildfires have burned hundreds of homes and scorched thousands of square miles in Washington state and Oregon. In California, 2 wildfires have prompted evacuations. Still, officials say the ceasefire
For decades, the United States has kept hundreds of nuclear-armed missiles on alert. But the missiles are aging. In the coming years, they must be replaced. Well, what purpose should these powerful weapons serve in the modern era? NPR's Jeff Brumfield recently traveled to a nuclear command bunker in western Nebraska for a series of stories on our program. In his final story today, Jeff explores whether replacing these weapons is worth the cost.
60 feet below ground, Lieutenant Raj Bansal sits in front of a computer console. He's checking 10 nuclear-tipped missiles to make sure they're working.
This is an actual real-life command being sent out to a missile, which is kind of surreal to think about.
There is something surreal about being down here. We're surrounded by old toggle switches and black telephones with cords. Everything feels outdated, and I do mean everything. The bunker's tiny toilet is working today, but like a lot of equipment down here, it doesn't always. Lieutenant Bansal points to a drain under the command post.
At some point, sewage has flooded this bottom area. It smells awful.
Aging equipment is one reason why morale has been low among the nation's missile forces. Things got so bad that crews were recently caught cheating on monthly proficiency tests. So as part of a series of reforms, the Air Force decided to give everything a facelift. This year, it will spend $50 million replacing uniforms, buying new vehicles, and yes, fixing those toilets. But at some point, the missiles themselves will need to be replaced. It's a far more expensive job, and the Air Force has already started planning for it. Which raises a question. Should these weapons be replaced?
The mission of the Cold War is gone.
Bruce Blair is co-founder of Global Zero, a group committed to the elimination of nuclear weapons. The missiles were pointed at Russia. Now, the U.S. also worries about countries like China, Iran, and North Korea. And Blair says these missiles don't threaten those countries for one simple reason.
In order for those land-based forces in the plains of the United States to be used against a country like North Korea or China or Iran, they would have to overfly Russia.
Missiles fly in a straight line, and their trajectory to almost every conceivable target goes north, up towards the Arctic, and then across Russian territory.
We're very leery of lobbing anything over the territory of Russia that may look like a missile attack against Russia because it could trigger Russia to fire by mistake and destroy our country.
The Pentagon says it is aware of the problem, but these land-based weapons aren't America's only nukes. They're part of a triad, a three-pronged nuclear defense that also includes bombers and submarines. The Defense Department won't comment on its war plans, but if America was to ever launch a strike on a country other than Russia, it's likely the bombers or subs would be used instead of the land-based missiles. Blair says the land-based missiles have another weakness. They're buried at fixed locations, which makes them vulnerable to a nuclear strike. To overcome that problem, they're designed to launch very quickly, within minutes. But once they do, there's no turning back.
You run a serious risk of mistaken launch or some other horrendous error.
Missiles are vulnerable to attack, but they don't need to be launched quickly because there are hundreds of them dispersed across the country.
No guy is going to think that he can take out the United States in a surprise attack if he has to hit at least 400 targets out there in the continental United States.
Elbridge Colby is at the Center for New American Security, a Washington think tank. Colby thinks land-based missiles provide extra protection because 3 kinds of weapons are better than 2.
I want to have a nuclear force that gives me a lot of certainty and gives the message to the adversary that there's no way that he's going to be able to take advantage of me. So that's the kind of insurance I want to buy for a nuclear force.
Buying a next generation of land-based missiles might cost somewhere around $100 billion over several years. That's actually not a lot compared to what the Pentagon spends on ships and fighter jets.
This is a relatively small part of the cost picture. It gives you a lot of bang for the buck. Actually, the expression bang for the buck came originally from us talking about nuclear forces. So I think that the cost problem lies elsewhere.
Bruce Blair, who's against keeping the missiles, says the submarines and bombers also need to be replaced. One estimate by arms control experts puts the total cost at up to $1 trillion.
Choices are going to have to be made, and I think that the land-based rocket component is on the chopping block.
Blair thinks the old missiles can find a better purpose as a bargaining chip with the Russians to get them to give up their missiles too. Jeff Brumfield, NPR News.
to All Things Considered from NPR News.
And you're tuned to WAMU 88.5. Good evening, I'm Rebecca Shear in for Pat Brogan. It's 12 minutes before 7 o'clock, 79 degrees in Northwest Washington, 78 degrees in Silver Spring, Maryland. And now with a look at the roadways this evening, here's Mike Ramirez. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Rebecca. Interloop at the Beltway heavy. Tyson's past the GW Parkway. Outloop at the Beltway slow. Van Dorn to the Wilson Bridge. Still solid. Northbound 395 Beltway to the activity near Glebe Road. Westbound 66 delays Vienna to Fairfax and in Centerville. Much better 95 Maryland on the northbound and the southbound side. I'm Mike Ramirez.
This traffic report is made possible with support from Kubota. More information available at KubotaDealersWashingtonArea.com.
Coming up tonight at 8 on The World, the story of two Middle Eastern women, one a Muslim Palestinian, the other Israeli and Jewish. We'll discuss how the recent trouble in their region is testing their friendship. Plus, we'll examine the gaping sinkholes that have mysteriously appeared in Russia. And we'll meet a Canadian scientist who spent 4 months living like he was on Mars. That's on The World tonight at 8 on WAMU 88.5. In our weather, tonight we'll see clear skies, lows around 65 degrees. Tomorrow, mostly sunny with a few afternoon clouds, highs around 90. Tomorrow night, the clouds will roll in, considerably cloudy skies with lows near 70 degrees. Looking ahead to Friday, storms roll in, scattered thunderstorms, especially in the afternoon. High right around 81. Chance of rain is 60%. It's 6:50.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Audie Cornish. If your boss was fired, would you walk off the job and protest? That's what's happening at a New England grocery store chain. Business at Market Basket stores is slow to a trickle as workers disrupt operations. Some are asking shoppers to stay away. As Kurt Nikish reports from member station WBUR in Boston, they want their CEO back.
Outside the Market Basket store in Somerville, Massachusetts, a dozen workers are waving signs featuring the bald head of their ousted CEO, Arthur T. DeMoulis. Gabriel Pinto, a grocery bagger, says he wants the new top executives gone.
We're here to get support from all the customers to try and make sure no one comes in. We want RDT back, you know?
That's Arthur T., not his cousin and boardroom rival, Arthur S. DeMoulis. Their battle for control of the company has now spilled over into the 71 supermarkets.
5 minutes, you like this?
Inside the store in Somerville, only 3 checkout aisles are open. None of them have lines. The entire produce section is barren.
Take that big Swiss out of there. It don't belong there.
At the deli counter at the back of the store, Adelaide Leonardo is stocking the display case with cheese that may just end up spoiling. Flyers are taped to the glass. One says, boycott Market Basket. Another says, bring back ATD, our one true leader. Leonardo agrees.
We know everybody. We know the customers. We joke around with us. We are family here.
Yet family is the reason Market Basket is in a muddle. Cousins Arthur T. and Arthur S. are both grandsons of a Greek immigrant, also named Arthur DeMoulis, who opened a small grocery in working-class Lowell, Massachusetts nearly a century ago. 2 of his sons grew it into a regional supermarket chain. Their sons have been feuding for decades. An epic legal battle between the two in the 90s featured a courtroom fistfight. Last month, Arthur S. gained control of the board and ousted Arthur T. That's when workers surprised themselves with their power to grind business to a standstill.
We're gonna survive. We stay strong.
Store manager and 24-year employee Daniel Rivera says workers are fiercely loyal to the ousted CEO for treating them well. Everyone gets quarterly bonuses, the pay is decent. Rivera says Arthur T. DeMoulis often came through the stores, making it clear he cares more about people than money.
Like I say, I work in different companies before. I never have owners come in to me and say, how you doing today, or how's your family? And it's great.
Now those loyal workers have brought the company to its knees. Market Basket is losing an estimated $10 million per day. John Davis, the head of the Families and Business program at Harvard Business School, says there's still time for the 2 DeMoulis cousins to put aside their egos and save the company.
Hopefully there's enough love in this family, not for one another anymore, but for the legacy of their fathers, that this family will do the right thing and recreate a stable ownership group.
As the deadlock drags on into its second week, the Market Basket board is discussing its options behind closed doors. This afternoon, company executives told employees to return to work on Monday, saying those who come back will be welcomed and not penalized. For NPR News, I'm Kurt Nickish in Boston.
If it were real, it might be the worst natural disaster in recent memory. A tornado filled with man-eating sharks. Fortunately for all of us, the Sharknado phenomenon is not real, as far as we know. The Sci-Fi Channel created this tongue-in-cheek B-movie last year, and if you were hiding under a rock, you may not be aware that it became a social media sensation. So tonight, the sequel debuts, and it's called Sharknado 2, The Second One. NPR TV critic Eric Deggans says this is a new kind of TV disaster movie. The intentionally bad kind. Welcome, Eric. I'm so excited to talk with you about this.
I'm so glad to be here.
I know you're not a meteorologist, but to the extent that you can, tell us what exactly a Sharknado is and why there are not one but two movies about it.
Well, in the movies, a Sharknado is a waterspout that essentially lifts up these loads of dangerous sharks and then drops them on unsuspecting people, flooding the city with man-eating sharks. So Sci-Fi built this gloriously bad TV movie around this concept last year, and it was starring Beverly Hills 90210 alum Ian Ziering and American Pie 2 star Tara Reid. And
luminaries of the silver screen.
You gotta love these guys. And it was such a social media hit that Sci-Fi made a sequel. And this time the Sharknado hits New York. Now we've got a scene here from the new movie with Reid and Ziering just after they survived the Sharknado attack.
The shark kept chasing me, and it had this huge scar across its face, and I shot him in the eye, but it took my hand. It's like he knew who I was.
No, he didn't know you. If he did, he would have run the other way. I'm sure about that.
Eric, it's so good because it's so bad.
Wait, what are you laughing about? That's drama.
I'm remembering the show Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was basically people making fun of really bad old B movies. But I feel like those movies maybe weren't supposed to be bad in the way that Sharknado and Sharknado 2 are supposed to be bad.
Exactly. That's what makes Sharknado and Sci-Fi's growing roster of these made-for-TV movies really unique. It's a B-level disaster movie that's seriously awful on purpose so people can make fun of it.
Can I get you to put on your cinema historian hat for a minute and talk about where this came from?
Well, these kind of disaster movies started as attempts to make serious films on a budget, like, say, Airport 75. But they were always fans who made fun of how stilted and preposterous they were. But Sharknado is different. It doesn't really have jokes, but it's not trying to be serious either. It tells a story that's so absurd and so earnest, with such bad acting, that the result is an intentionally unintentional comedy.
But it seems like the joke is on us, because while we are busy talking about and tweeting about this movie, Sci-Fi is making a ton of money off something that costs very little to produce.
Yeah, that's a great point. And they hired some of the cheapest actors, people who are amateurs like Kelly Osbourne and Billy Ray Cyrus and rapper Biz Markie to make cameo roles. So yeah, it's very cheap to produce these movies.
Okay, so when I watched Sharknado 1, and I am not ashamed to admit that I did, I found the Twitter reaction almost more entertaining than the show itself. So give tips for the best way to watch a phenomenon like this.
For sure. First, you want to watch this in a group so you can shout your snarky insults at the screen. Second, you gotta know your D-list actors. I watched this with my teen and tween daughters, and, a lot of the people they didn't know, it kind of went over their head. And then there's a whole second screen experience here where you can tweet your snarky lines to your friends across the country, and that's important too. Sci-Fi has been making these kind of movies for a long time, but I think with Sharknado, they've got the perfect marriage of outlandish concept, amateurish acting, and middling production values. And if you miss it on TV, you can see it in theaters on August 21st, which might even be more fun.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
NPR TV critic Eric Deggans.
NPR comes from NPR member stations and from the Cy Sims Foundation, supporting advances in science, education, and the arts since 1985. CySimsFoundation.org. From the Walton Family Foundation, whose K-12 initiative works to empower families with quality school choices. WaltonK12.org. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. This is NPR.
Consider becoming a sustaining member of WAMU 88.5 with an ongoing monthly contribution. It's quick, easy, and goes a long way towards supporting your favorite shows. Find out more at 800-248-8850 or WAMU.org. Thanks.
Coming up at 7 o'clock, All Things Considered continues, and at 8, it's The World. We'll hear the story of two Middle Eastern women, one a Muslim Palestinian, the other Israeli and Jewish. We'll discuss how the recent trouble in their region is testing their friendship. Plus, we'll examine the gaping sinkholes that have mysteriously appeared in Russia. And we'll meet a scientist who spent 4 months living like he was on Mars. That's coming up on The World tonight at 8 on WAMU 88.5, followed by On Point. This is member-supported public radio from American University, WAMU Washington, where the mind is our medium. In HD at 88.5, at WRAU 88.3 in Ocean City, Maryland, and streaming at WAMU.org. It's 7 o'clock.
We are done with the days of asking victims why they drank too much or wore the wrong thing.
Senators introduce legislation to stem the tide of sexual assault on campus.
It's Wednesday, July 30th, and this is All Things Considered from NPR News. And I'm Ari Shapiro. Lawmakers want to hold universities more accountable for how they handle sexual assault.
Having 1 in 5 women being raped during their college career is unacceptable. It shouldn't be part of the cost of a college education to endure sexual assault.
Later, reporters mapped the massive debris field in eastern Ukraine where the Malaysian airliner was shot down.
It can show us where pieces of debris are in relation to one another, which might tell us a bit about how they fell and how the impact took place in the first place.
And our series on men turns to the silver screen.
Now news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. In the Gaza Strip, 17 people are reported dead, more than 100 others wounded after explosions in a busy commercial area of Gaza City. From Gaza, NPR's Emily Harris reports the attack happened during a 4-hour humanitarian ceasefire initiated by Israel.
Israel's ceasefire announcement came with caveats. It would not apply in places Israeli troops were already operating, the statement said, and Gazans should not go back to areas the Israeli military had earlier told them to leave. Many people in Gaza City used the time to shop, but about halfway through the ceasefire window, explosives hit a crowded market area. It borders the Shujaya neighborhood, which was evacuated 10 days ago and has been heavily bombarded. The Israeli military says it provided the rules of the ceasefire to local Gazan media, but did not drop leaflets or spell out safe areas. A military spokesman said he did not know what hit the market. Emily Harris, NPR News, Gaza.
The House has voted along party lines on a measure that would authorize a lawsuit against President Obama, though Democrats are already dismissing it as nothing more than political theater. The suit accuses the president of violating the Constitution by exceeding his executive powers. Speaking in Kansas City today, President Obama called it a political stunt being carried out at the expense of taxpayers. Federal prosecutors are accusing half a dozen Philadelphia police narcotics officers of using gangland tactics to shake down local drug dealers, including beatings, threats, and extortion. Authorities in one instance, officers held a suspect over an 18th floor balcony. Named David Meminger is the U.S. attorney who announced the charges.
We are here to announce the unsealing of a 26-count indictment charging 6 police officers from the Philadelphia Police Department's Narcotics Field Unit with abusing their official positions to rob and extort suspected drug dealers and to fabricate police reports covering up their illegal activities.
6 all pleaded not guilty during brief federal court hearing. At the end of their 2-day meeting in Washington, Federal Reserve officials upgraded their assessment of the U.S. economy, but as NPR's John Itzi reports in a statement they released after the meeting, policymakers signaled no hurry to raise interest rates. Fed officials did say they'll continue winding down their bond-buying stimulus program, reducing their bond purchases to $25 billion a month in August. That keeps that program on track to end in October. But the statement also said the Fed will likely continue to keep the current target for short-term interest rates near zero for a considerable time after the bond buying program ends. Policymakers acknowledged an improvement in the labor market and the falling unemployment rate, but they added that, quote, there remains significant underutilization of labor resources. That suggests the majority still think a hike in the benchmark rate shouldn't come until well into next year. John Itstein, NPR News, Washington.
On Wall Street, the Dow is down 31 points, the Nasdaq gained 20 points. You're listening to NPR.
Support for NPR comes from the Melville Charitable Trust, supporting solutions to prevent and end homelessness. On the web at melvilletrust.org.
This is WAMU 88.5 and 88.3 in Ocean City, Maryland. Good evening, I'm Rebecca Shear in for Pat Brogan. It's 7:04, and with the latest on the roadways, let's turn to Mike Ramirez. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Rebecca. Still have some delays on the inner loop, but things are easing up. Slow right now before the Dulles Toll Road past the GW Parkway. Problem on the outer loop, solid right now. Springfield to the accident activity at the Wilson Bridge. Westbound 66 slow Vienna to Fairfax and in Centerville. Also a bit slow on 66 inside the Beltway each way getting to Falls Church Metro. Northbound 395 heavy Beltway past Duke Street is southbound 95 Virginia heavy in Stafford. Rebecca?
Thanks, Mike. It's 7:05. It's 79 degrees in Northwest Washington. In the news, in Virginia, the government's key witness in the corruption trial for former Governor Bob McDonnell has testified that he gave the governor and his wife money because it was a business relationship, not because they were friends. Northern Virginia reporter Michael Pope has the story.
Johnny Williams took the stand under the cloak of immunity. Williams is a colorful car salesman turned venture capitalist and the former chief executive of Star Scientific, a Virginia-based company. Prosecutors say Williams gave the McDonald's more than $165,000 in secret gifts, cash, and loans in exchange for promoting his product. The trial began by diving into the sordid details of the McDonald's marriage. Bob McDonald's attorney says he was an honest politician. Maureen McDonald's lawyers say she was not a public official. I'm Michael Pope.
Williams' testimony is set to continue tomorrow. National ride-sharing company Uber is continuing to take passengers in Annapolis, Maryland, despite the city's request that Uber either stop operating or register as a taxicab service. Uber Technologies has reached out to the city's transportation board and is scheduled to meet with the group next month. The city is holding back on official action against Uber until it can meet with the company. In our weather, tonight we'll see clear skies, lows around 65 degrees. Tomorrow, generally sunny, despite a few afternoon clouds, high around 90. And for tomorrow night, considerable clouds with lows around 70 degrees. It's 79 degrees in Arlington, Virginia, 77 degrees in Bethesda, Maryland, and 79 degrees in Northwest Washington. I'm Rebecca Shear, WAMU 88.5 News.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ani Cornish.
I'm Ari Shapiro. We've heard a lot about federal efforts to stem the epidemic of sexual assault on American college campuses. The latest action comes from a bipartisan group of lawmakers who introduced new legislation today. Studies show 1 in 5 women are raped or assaulted while in school. The bill imposes new penalties on colleges and universities for not complying with certain requirements. In a moment, we'll hear from 2 of the bill's sponsors. First, NPR's Laura Sullivan reports on a story shared at today's news conference on Capitol Hill.
Anna went off to Hobart and William Smith Colleges in New York last year and was allegedly raped 16 days into her freshman year. A medical examiner's report found blunt force trauma, possibly from multiple partners, and an eyewitness said he saw Anna passed out in the back of a dance hall, being raped by football players while others watched and took pictures. The football players denied the charges. The school cleared them 12 days later. One of the first people Anna called was her mom, Susan.
There are really no words to explain what a parent goes through when they get a phone call like that.
Susan and Anna have been trying to pick up the pieces ever since.
It is hard to convey what this means to the family. Spread out in the toughest neighborhoods,
And in some Chicago communities that have adopted this strategy, there's been a significant drop in serious crime. Here's Cheryl Williams. On this day, Cook County Assistant State's Attorney Deborah Witzberg is talking to a group of seniors about financial scams that target older people. Witzberg spends part of her day in court prosecuting a mix of misdemeanors and felonies, and throughout the year, she and her fellow prosecutor, Deanna Garcia Carmelo, give presentations like this session to seniors, or they talk to kids about guns or cyberbullying.
Being in touch and involved in the communities in which we're located allows us to have a sense of what problems are ongoing and what sorts of challenges people are facing in their day-to-day lives. And that gives us a sense of what cases have a real quality of life impact on the people who live in our district.
Community prosecutors like Witzberg aren't your traditional prosecutors. They do try cases or defend work through the courthouse. They develop close relationships with neighborhood groups and try to devise ways to predict crime. University of Chicago law professor Thomas Miles says despite its growing popularity, there aren't many studies about the effects of community prosecution.
We often engage in these public policy changes and public policy experiments without really any evidence on what has been working.
In his own analysis, Miles says the empirical evidence is significant and shows that in areas of Chicago where community prosecutions are a factor, instances of violent crime like rape and murder drop substantially.
The sharpest and clearest reductions were in the area of aggravated assaults. But it also appears that there are reductions in robberies and burglaries.
Now, standing in the parking lot of a small strip mall in Chicago's uptown neighborhood, this is one of the first places where the Cook County State's Attorney's Office tried out community prosecutions. The whole issue started actually with the building right next door to White House, which was the Lawrence House. Assistant State's Attorney Joy Rutella supervises Cook County's full storefront community justice center. She says the Twin Tower Lawrence House, once an upscale apartment complex for Chicago. The building is being rehabbed now, but Rutella says not long ago, nearly 20% of the calls to police for service in the neighborhood came from the Lawrence House. So she worked with the community to map out a plan. We met with the management there. We concentrated our prosecutions in some of the problem offenders there. For example, I did a trial against someone who was charged with robbing an elderly man, and he had 107 prior arrests. In less than a year, the calls to police dropped from 20% to less than 1%, and the focus turned to the plaza next door. The National Center for Community Prosecution says Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and nearly half of the prosecutors' offices
Israel's military says it is calling up another 16,000 reservists, bringing the number of mobilized reservists to 86,000. A military official said the additional call-up is to rotate out fighters to allow for more flexibility in the fighting. The military won't say how many of its troops are in Gaza, but it says reservists that are serving there are also patrolling Israel's other borders, replacing active duty soldiers sent to Gaza. The reservists were called up just hours after the country's security cabinet authorized the military to continue its operation against militants in Gaza. The military said it attacked 20 sites in Gaza overnight. For NPR News, I'm Daniel Estrin in Jerusalem. It's been 2 weeks since Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 shot down over eastern Ukraine. Today, investigators and monitors reached the debris field for the first time in almost a week. This after officials in Kiev announced they're suspending offensive operations in the area against pro-separatist rebels. A Senate vote's expected today on a $16 billion bill to fix systematic problems at the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Not a blank check for a broken system, but an important first step down a long road toward true transformation.
That's Florida Congressman Jeff Miller, who chairs the House Veterans Affairs Committee after the House votes the bill. Votes are also expected today in the House and Senate on competing bills to deal with unaccompanied minors from Central America crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally. Some major rulings are expected today from the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Chuck Hornbach of Wisconsin Public Radio says decisions are likely on voter ID, collective bargaining, and benefits for same-sex partners. The collective bargaining case stems from Republican Governor Scott Walker's effort to limit negotiating rights for most public sector workers. The decision is coming in Walker's House for attempt to require voters to show a photo ID at the polls. Many state justices will also weigh in, and conservatives push to overturn some benefits for same-sex couples. Tech University law professor Gene Gusty expects the Wisconsin court to be provided.
I anticipate there'll be defense and statements back and forth.
The U.S. Justice Department has filed a brief in a federal case of Wisconsin voter ID law, calling the measure pernicious. For NPR News, I'm Chuck Hornbach in Milwaukee. This is NPR News. It's 7:33 and time to get a check of the morning commute with Jerry Edwards. Jerry?
Jonathan, on 295 northbound, as you leave the district headed to Maryland between East Capitol Street and Jennings Road, accident cleanup continues and delays continue to grow. Backup now begins at least Pennsylvania Avenue, beginning to reach just more south than that. So extra travel time needed there. Northbound 295 headed for Maryland. Southbound, lanes reported open, but look for delays coming off the BW Parkway and Route 50. Police wrapping up the long-standing crash, Florida Avenue and New York Avenue. They should be out of there before long. No accidents on 270. Beltway north of town reported to be incident-free. Interloop south of town, good indicator folks headed out maybe for a long weekend. Delays on the Interloop Route 5, tune across the Wilson Bridge, and just sun-glare delays coming in from the west on 66 and the Florida. Jonathan?
Thanks, Jerry. Up to 66 degrees here in northwest Washington. Full forecast with Tom Pirine just ahead. But first, some of Metro's Blue Line riders say their commutes are a nightmare now that the Silver Line is up and running. Transportation reporter Martin DeCaro watched an afternoon rush hour unfold at the Roslyn station to see if it's as bad as some are claiming.
They stand, they wait, they gaze up at the screen showing the arrival times. A train pulls in. All they want to know, is it too crowded to board? This is insane. We need to do something about it. What Metro's done is cut Blue Line service to one train every 12 minutes to make way for the Silver Line through this tunnel. And as the rush hour reaches its peak and hundreds of commuters shuffle down escalators to fill the Roslyn platform, I start watching the parade, orange, silver, and blue, starting at 5 p.m. Okay, at 5:11, it's the first Blue Line train of the hour arriving here at Roslyn. The platform is pretty crowded, and the train coming by is also pretty crowded. Let's see if it's a 6 or an 8-car train. This is disgrace, so we no cars. It's a 6-car train and packed to the doors. The next Blue Line's an 8-car train. Some commuters stay in the center of the platform where the middle cars pull up, too crowded to board. Got it. All right, are you going to try to squeeze in there? No way.
elbow is stuck. I saw you get stuck in the car there.
Yeah.
Was it because of the silver line?
Yeah, they only come every like 10, 12 minutes, so we'll come for another 4 or 5 trains.
Let's see, this is an 8-car train. Let's see if the last car is... Yeah, I think, you would have gotten the seat there. By the end of one full hour, only 4 Blue Line trains make it through, one less than Metro promises, and only 21 trains of all 3 lines pass. 5 fewer than maximum capacity for the Roslyn Tunnel, so the 10 Orange Line and 7 Silver Line trains were also more crowded than need be.
It's always packed.
Do you have an alternative to the Blue Line to get home?
I don't have a car right now, so no. Car's in the shop.
She may want to give her mechanic a call and tell him to hurry up. I'm walking to town.
There's a bipartisan effort underway in the Senate to combat sexual assaults on college campuses. Capitol Hill reporter Matt Laszlo has the story.
When Andrea Pino attended college in North Carolina, she was sexually assaulted at an off-campus party. After that experience, she helped found a group named Rape on Campus.
We live in a country that puts our children at a higher risk of experiencing sexual assault if they attend college than if they don't.
Estimates are that nearly 1 in 5 female students is sexually assaulted while in college. Universities and colleges are required to report the rate of sexual assaults on campus to the Department of Education, but critics say many don't reveal the numbers in order to attract more students. New legislation would punish schools for falsifying data and forbid athletic departments from handling cases of sexual assaults. Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner says Congress needs to increase pressure on universities to protect students better. We gotta do better. 4 Democrats and 4 Republican senators are sponsoring the bill to combat sexual assaults on campuses. Warner says that's a welcome relief to the usual public partisan atmosphere on Capitol Hill.
You don't see this scene often enough in Washington, where Democrats and Republicans are checking their D's and R's and taking on an issue of enormous importance.
The legislation hasn't been scheduled for a vote. Reporting from the Capitol, I'm Matt Laszlo.
Now for a look at the full forecast, here's NBC4 meteorologist Tom Kieran.
Good morning, Jonathan. A bit milder this morning. Temperatures now in the 60s much of the region. By noontime, the low 80s. Ought to hit mid-80s mid-afternoon. A little more humid today, too. Lots of sun this morning and just a few clouds during the afternoon. Then getting mostly cloudy tonight, and during the day on Friday, more humid. Might get a late morning shower. A greater chance of some afternoon thunderstorms into Friday evening as well. More thunderstorms likely. Tomorrow's high just low 80s. Over the weekend, too, we'll keep the chance of showers and thunderstorms in for both Saturday and Sunday. And mainly late morning and afternoon showers and storms both days with highs low 80s. For meteorologist Tom Kieran.
Thanks, Tom. In sports news, Washington put together a 3-run 8th inning to beat the Marlins 4-3 and take a 1.5-game lead over Atlanta in the National League East. Jason Worth snapped a 1-1 tie with a sacrifice fly before Ian Desmond's 2-run double gave the Nationals a 3-run cushion. Tanner Roark allowed 1 run in 7 innings as the Nats ended the Marlins' 6-game winning streak. The Marketplace Morning Report is coming up in just about 10 minutes. On the Diane Rehm Show starting at 10, understanding the deadly Ebola virus and what's being done to contain it. Then at 11, best-selling author Amy Bloom on her latest novel, Lucky Us.
Support for WAMU 88.5 comes from Dunkin' Donuts, offering coffee happy hour daily from 2 to 6 with hot and iced coffee. Information on the nearest location is on the Dunkin' Donuts mobile app. America runs on Dunkin'. Support for WAMU 88.5 comes from General Dynamics Information Technology, committed to supporting the mission through logistics modernization and integration. General Dynamics IT, GDIT.com.
Hey, it's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Renee Montaigne.
And I'm Linda Wertheimer. More and more young travelers are passing up a few weeks in the sun to work in orphanages, build schools, or teach English in other countries. It's called volunteer tourism, or voluntourism. It's one of the fastest growing trends in travel today, with more than 1.6 million volunteer tourists spending about $2 billion a year on do-good trips. NPR's Carrie Kahn caught up with some traveling volunteers in Guatemala and filed this report.
All volunteers and visitors get a big warm welcome when you walk in the doors of Pro de Fin. It's a community center, part orphanage, part after-school program in a small village high in the hills above the colonial tourist town of Antigua. There are 3 volunteers here, all from the U.S.
Yeah, my real name is Kyle
but yeah, mi apodo es
Carlos, or Kyle Winningham, just graduated from the University of San Francisco with a degree in entrepreneurship. He didn't have a job lined up, so decided to spend his summer here.
When the kids have homework, I help with homework. When they don't, generally help out teaching a little bit of English. But today we're going to cook.
A picar, lo vamos a picar finamente y luego...
Judith Lopez, the center's director, hands out bowls filled with bright red tomatoes, onions, and mint. She's teaching the children how to make salsa.
La mayoría de ellos, sus papás son muertos.
Lopez says most of the kids here don't have parents. They live with relatives. Some were abandoned by their mothers at birth. Others lost their fathers in accidents or to alcoholism. She says she's grateful for the volunteers who give the kids what they need most, love and encouragement. 19-year-old Haley Nording is spending her whole summer here. The first 6 weeks, she helped build the newest addition to the center, a small library. Now she's tutoring. She's an international relations major at American University in Washington, D.C.
So I met a lot of international relations majors who are here volunteering. It seems like a trend.
Most volunteer tourists are women and young, between the ages of 20 and 25, according to Tourism Research and Marketing, an industry consultancy. But more and more high schoolers are traveling and volunteering too. Sam Dodano is a junior at Rumson Fairhaven High School in New Jersey. His whole Spanish classes in Antigua, boning up on language skills, hiking up the side of a volcano, learning to help tend to a coffee plantation, and also learning about what life is like here in Guatemala.
The way I view things now is a lot different from before, because I visit other countries, but I've never done like hands-on work or really talked to the people about like the problems that they face in their life.
That worldview is a lot different than just 2 decades ago, says Ken Jones, who owns Maximo Nivel, a volunteer tourism company out of Antigua. He got his start in the travel business, just offering Spanish language classes. But he says young people today want a richer experience.
It used to be beach and beer. And now it's, I want to come down and learn something, I want to come down and figure out how to help or be a part of something. It was more superficial 20 years ago.
Teresa Higgs has seen the industry explode in the past few years, too. She runs United Planet out of Boston, what she calls a cultural immersion program. She says she's heartened by the but is worried about the flood of for-profit organizations bursting onto the scene.
And what I think often gets lost is the host communities. Are they gaining? Are they winning? Are they true partners in this? Or are they simply a means to an end, to a student's learning objective, to someone's desire to have fun on vacation and learn something?
Higgs urges travelers to work in research companies, just as you would before giving to a charity or volunteering for any organization. United Church of Christ of Yarmouth, Maine, learning how to comprehend in the mime language. Volunteering for a week at St. Passages, a nonprofit that helps children and parents who live and work in the capital swallowing garbage down. It's pouring rain outside. 17-year-old Mary Kay lives in Newport Beach. She says she's glad she can do something vacation here instead of at the beach.
Yes, I'm not going to eat ice cream or whatnot, but it's something different. It's like your whole being is satisfied because of experiences like this.
Terry Kahn, NPR News.
Now let's get a broader overview. Nancy McGee is a professor of hospitality and tourism at Virginia Tech. She studies volunteer tourism and its impacts. Nancy McGee, welcome to the program.
Thank you. My pleasure. Why exactly in this last couple of decades has this exploded? Well, I think there are a combination of things. Post-2000s and with the recession and that sort of thing, young people are having difficulty in the job market, so instead of opting for sitting at home trying to get a job, they opt for this volunteer tourism. They can travel cheaply, they can engage in activities that they find fulfilling, and they can build their resume. So it's this sort of perfect storm of altruism and resume building. And I think for me, one of the biggest perks to this is the recognition that volunteer tourism on the surface looks like something that's going to benefit host communities. At the heart, I think it's about transforming the volunteer. It's helping them see that they fit in the global scheme of things.
Well, I guess at the heart of it, it has to do with helping or transforming in some way those who are looking to do good. What about the communities themselves? We just heard about this group in Guatemala, volunteering at an orphanage and community center, and I'm wondering, that seems to be doing some good, as you
I guess for me, when I'm looking at the research, there's a full spectrum in terms of volunteer tourism. Those are those kinds of activities, but there are lots of other things going on. And my concern is that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I think the volunteer tourism itself still offers some of the greatest potential for economic opportunity if you do it right. But I would agree that it's not necessarily that form of volunteer tourism that does that best.
Could you give us an example of, say, how to do it right?
One of the things that's really intriguing me right now is this idea of applying fair trade concepts to volunteer travel. So, are the organizations creating opportunities for disadvantaged producers? Are the organizations pointing to ways in which they're doing community capacity building? So, those are sorts of the framework that we're looking at for organizations that are doing it right.
Since this boom in volunteer tourism, there's been a bit of a piling on of criticism about how much good they're really doing. What would you say to that?
Well, there has been a lot of negative press these days about volunteer tourism, and I kind of draw the analogy with ecotourism in the 80s, because when it initially emerged, it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it was wonderful, and it was going to do great things for the environment. And then we had this sort of natural swinging of the pendulum to the other side, where all of a sudden we were pointing to bad examples, and we were saying maybe not, this isn't the best idea. And I'm seeing a very similar thing happening with volunteer tourism. And I guess what I hope for is that we find that happy medium, and we find that place where we can, on one side, recognize the great examples of volunteer tourism that are out there, but on the other hand, take advantage of this time to really look critically at the various organizations that are there and to help them be accountable for their activities in these host communities. And that's where I think you really need to do your homework, recognize whether the organization is transparent, is the organization community-centered, and all these things maximize the positive impacts while minimizing the negatives.
Nancy McGee is a professor of hospitality and tourism at Virginia Tech. You're listening to Morning Edition from NPR.
It's 7:49. This is WAMU 88.5. It's time to check in with Jerry Edwards on the morning commute. Jerry?
Jonathan, northbound on Kenilworth Avenue or DC 295, police are wrapping up the earlier crash after East Cannon Street. On a sizable northbound delay southbound Shippa and 97. Southbound on PNC Parkway 197, crash is reported. Rescue crews headed out there right now. Back to the district, still seeing activity along New York Avenue and Florida Avenue. Watch for police. You may still find at least a lane closed off while they wrap up and tell the vehicles involved in the collision earlier this morning. Montgomery County Aspen Hill on Belfry Road and Homecrest Road. Watch for police headed for an accident there. That report 7:15.
Thanks, Jerry. We're up to 68 degrees here in northwest Washington today. Mostly sunny. Expected highs in the upper 80s tonight. Partly cloudy in the evening and becoming mostly cloudy. Lows in the upper 60s. It's time for Heartbeat with Lauren Landau.
If you're feeling nostalgic for the late 1990s, the rock band Smash Mouth is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. The group performs tonight at the State Theater and Falls Church at 8 p.m. You'll hear some of the band's past hits, including All Star and The Morning Comes, their popular cover of I'm a Believer, and more. Local indie rock duo The Raised by Wolves will open the show. DC-based folk rock group Elena and Los Culanos marks the release of its first full album, Miel Venenosa, with a performance tonight at Tropicalia. Sung in both Spanish and English, the 13-track album highlights the band's bilingual and multicultural identity, which nods to the lead singer's blended American and Nicaraguan heritage. The concert starts at 7 p.m. For more, you can visit us online at WAMU.org/parts or follow us on Twitter at WAMU-Heartbeat.
Decoding the Fed.
Marketplace Morning Report is produced in association with the University of Southern California and by Zillow, with homes for sale, historical pricing data, and photos all available on Zillow.com or on their mobile apps. Zillow, find your way home.
From 8 p.m. in New York, good morning. I'm Mark Garrison in for David Brancaccio. This is Fed Speak Week. The central bank says it likes some of the isn't fully satisfied yet. So keeping interest rates low for some